Gymnastics BC out here in British Columbia for the last about 18 years. So I've predominantly what we used to do was have a full day session, like a camp where nutrition was part of that camp. And we'd have some presentations throughout the day, and then I'd work with individual athletes. So over the years, things have changed, and there's new evidence that comes along the way that helps us adjust things. But there's certain fundamentals that always are there in the foreground. So those are some of the things I want to cover. I'm going to start with that. And as Leanne was saying, as far as the questions are concerned, if you have burning questions you want answered right away, just type them in, and I could do that so they don't get lost. All right, let's take a look here. Now, okay, so the first thing when you look at the energetic or the bioenergetic demands of gymnastics, I have here strength, flexibility, coordination, motivation, dedication. Certainly with almost any athlete, these factors come into play. But I think there are specific words that really do represent the sport quite well. The fact that these are up here really do give an idea of how difficult it is of a discipline and how committed athletes have to be. Now, gymnastics itself is a high-intensity anaerobic sport. So it requires these multiple efforts with short rest periods, and this goes on and on and on. So the primary fuel being used for this is glucose and glycogen. Those are the fuels for activity. Now, I want to keep that in mind as we go through the fundamentals, and I'll pull it back. So when we're looking at the nutrition fundamentals, you have your macronutrients. These are your carbohydrates, your fats, your proteins. They make up the bulk of your dietary intake. This is where the majority of your calories are coming from, is these foods. So they allow for the metabolic system to function. You have your micronutrients. These are needed only in very small amounts, but they are very important for many metabolic factors that carry out and they orchestrate lots of different physiological functions. So despite the fact they're needed only in small amounts, they're crucially important. I will say that I see a fellow there taking some images. I have the slides. I'll send out the slides to everybody if you want them. You don't have to, if you need images of the shots or whatever, I could send the slides out to everybody just as an FYI, okay? So the thing with the micronutrients, and this is where a lot of, not just athletes, but a lot of people in general kind of run into some issues, is they think, well, if a certain amount is good, then more should be better. And this is where it's tricky with these micronutrients and actual vitamins and minerals and single doses, high levels of vitamins and minerals. So if you look at these two bars here, you have the naive view and the accurate view. Okay, well, the naive view, or they should say it's the view that some people have, is that, well, if you're in the danger zone because you're not getting enough, you need to get enough, and then if you take more than enough, then it's better. And that's not the case. There's a tolerable limit, as you can see on the other bar. And this tolerable limit here is, there's a certain, it's basically two standard deviations of safety when you look at it. But it's easy to go into toxicity, and toxicity, it doesn't really take much. Over time, it can start to build up. So it's just a point of saying that when you're looking at foods, you want to focus on the foods and not so much as single doses of vitamins and minerals. Like I've had people come to me and say, hey, I've heard, selenium is good for me, and I've been taking X amount of selenium per day. And can be a problem because it can interact with a lot of other vitamins and minerals. To give you an example, it's like toxicity with vitamin A. It's toxic to the liver in very high amounts. In early Arctic explorers learned that the hard way when they were eating, I think, polar bear and seal liver, which is very, very high in vitamin A, thousands of times higher than what you'd find in beef. And they got very ill and some of them died. So other things like niacin can decrease your ability to use fat from fat stores. Too much vitamin C can cause kidney stones. B6 could create loss of sensation in the limbs, balance and coordination. Obviously not a good thing for a gymnast. And iron, too much iron can lead to liver damage. So when we're talking about variety, the reason why variety in the diet is important is that you have more variety, you'll have more nutrients, and more nutrients means more micronutrients that you have variety to, and more of these micronutrients allows for more phytonutrients. And these are the phytochemicals. These are the special chemical compounds in foods, common foods that we eat and know, like these cruciferous vegetables and berries and everything else that we eat. All the colorful foods that we're eating are full of these phytonutrients. They have, and this has been well studied, anti-tumor, anti-cancer, anti-inflammatory, anti-heart disease effects, but they also are important for performance. Now, if you look at some of these particular chemicals, you look at nitrates in vegetables. Now, we're not talking about the kind of nitrates you'd find like sodium nitrates in processed foods like cold cuts and things like that. These are inorganic nitrates that convert to nitric oxide in the bloodstream. What this does is relaxes the blood vessels. It's an anticoagulant. It's high in potassium, so it's a good vasodilator. And it improves fat metabolism, increases oxygen-rich blood supply to the muscles, and improves overall performance outcomes. So they find that when you're getting more of these inorganic nitrates in the diet, performance is better. It's well measured and it's better. And again, these are common foods. They're in the green leafy vegetables. For a while, it was said, people were saying, oh, it's the beet juice. You got to go for beets. Well, beets are part of that. As you can see, beets here, the bottom is 110. At the end there, it says 281. That's not beets. It should be beets. It should be rhubarb. That's rhubarb. And beet juice at the end is 279. But what's very high here at 400 is arugula, which is just like a leafy green. You know, your mixed greens, Swiss chard, basil, cilantro, all these things are very high in these nitrate compounds. So by combining these foods, the more variety we have, the stronger and the more nutrient dense the diet will be. And over time, that will lead to a real good performance outcome and also good health. When you're looking at proteins, the fundamental idea with proteins is we want to have complete proteins. And what complete proteins mean are you basically have the 9 essential amino acids in these foods. Some of these foods are naturally containing these 9 essentials. And these essential amino acids are important for a protein to be complete. The essential amino acids are the building blocks and are crucial for repair, growth, and development. Now, how much protein is enough? This has been a debate, and I think with athletes especially, a lot of them are very focused on protein. Am I getting enough protein? Should I be buying protein supplements? How much protein do I need? The fact of the matter is with protein, they've learned regardless of your age, whether it's a young teenager or even before teens or older adult or athlete, you need more protein than what was normally recommended. The normal recommendation used to be about 0.8 per grams, 0.8 grams per kilogram. The actual amount that you would need as an athlete would be anywhere from 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. Could go up as high as 2. For example, in a clinical situation, someone who's going through a lot of metabolic stress, if someone's been severely burned or they've sustained a lot of physical trauma from an accident, the protein intake could be as high as 2.5, gram per kilogram. Now, when you're talking about the amounts well, how much do you need at each sitting? Well, here, you've heard perhaps in the past that the protein portion should be around the size of a deck of cards. So here we have 4 ounces of meat. That's about 30 grams, or a little over 30 grams. I put the example here of the 72-ounce steak in Amarillo, Texas. It's quite an obscene gesture when you think about it. But this is like, this extreme example of meat consumption. But the interesting thing with protein is that you can only absorb so much at a time. Now that value is usually, the people, I think, there's always been questioned about it, but the research has shown that around 25 to 35 grams is that ceiling. Perhaps a much larger athlete would be a little higher. But for people who sit down and have a big meal that has 100 grams of protein in it, you can almost rest assured that 60 of those grams of protein have gone to waste. They actually have to be broken down and used just as a source of energy and stored. So it really is a waste of money. It's hard. It's a lot of metabolic work to deal with it. You don't need too much. You need to dose and time it out, which we'll talk about why timing is so important. So you got to get the protein, but not too much at once. And this is where this meal pattern distribution is important. And it's kind of perhaps this would be like a general idea of what happens to a lot of people. There's this unbalanced distribution. So on the left, you'll see that with the green bar, the first one, breakfast, very often people aren't getting enough protein. They're not getting the full 30 grams. They may be just having a piece of toast with something, a bowl of cereal, perhaps an egg and a piece of toast. But the protein is, let's say it's around 10 grams of protein. So if they've missed the opportunity to hit, you see this yellow bar is protein synthesis. So you need a certain amount of protein to flip on a switch that, and this is regulated by an amino acid called leucine that turns on the switch for protein synthesis to take place. So you need enough protein in the meal to flip that switch on. So at breakfast, it's not happening because there wasn't enough there. At lunch, perhaps you're getting the amount, but a lot of times it may be less. So the meal that most people get a lot of protein at, and this is a generalization, okay, not necessarily for athletes, but certainly for, let's say, the general public, is dinner is the big meal where they have a lot of protein, and often it's more than what they need. So the better idea is to go with this distribution of balancing protein and the meals throughout the day and between exercise and training, that you're maximizing this protein synthesis, and you're getting 30 grams at each meal. Okay. Proteins, what does 30 grams look like? The 4 ounces of meat, 4 eggs, 4 ounces of chicken, a can of tuna, 3 cups of milk, or milk and some Greek yogurt mixed with cereals, or 2 cups of black beans and rice would give you 30 grams of protein. Now fats are obviously a very important component. We need the fats, the essential fatty acids. They're important not just as a source of energy and protecting the organs, but for hormone production, testosterone and vitamin D synthesis. So the essential fats that we should be getting through the diets. Now, fat's a hot topic as well. because there's this idea of, well, you've heard of good fats, bad fats. What should you have? What should you avoid? Um, Certainly the polyunsaturated fats, these are your omega-3s, omega-6s, omega-9s, fish, nuts, vegetable oils. And even within these fats, um, you have, the omega-3s are well documented to be protective to heart health. And the omega-6s are actually, when there's too much of an omega-6 imbalance, like if you have a product, you're looking at it and say, oh, look at that, it's got, just for the sake of throwing a number out there, it's got 2 grams of omega-6, but it's only got 1 gram of omega-3, then this is imbalanced to the point of view that it's not the best choice. The omega-6s can cause an inflammatory response in higher doses. So this would be something for perhaps like in a canola oil, might be more omega-6 than in olive oil. So these are little details that we'd have to pay attention to, but it makes a difference. And if you have inflammation, inflammation is not a good thing, certainly for anybody and not an athlete. The saturated fats, these are your meat, dairy, tropical oils. And the trans fatty acids, I think it's safe to say, you can rest assured that there's no two ways about it. These trans fats are bad news. This hydrogenation of plant fats, taking an oil and making it hard, and then that just terrible for what it does for the cardiovascular system. So that we know we have to avoid those trans fats. And labels, food labels have come a long way in identifying. We have good food labeling laws in Canada. But if we look at, for example, the saturated fats in something like cheese, okay, it's very complicated. Some people would say, well, no, you can't eat cheese. It's full of fats, has saturated fats. And cheese, you look at the history of cheese making, it dates back before recorded time. I mean, it's been over 7,000 years cheese has been being made. But when people think about it, they say, well, it's fat. There's protein in there. There's calcium. But when you look at, this is from a study done at the University of Montreal in Quebec and Laval as well, where they looked at this and they found there's 400 different fatty acid species in cheese, different kinds of cheeses. So there's carbs or sterols, there's minerals, vitamins, bacterial, moisture. And what they found is that the saturated fat from cheese had a positive effect on the HDL. The HDL cholesterol, many of you would probably know that this is the good cholesterol that moves, shuttles fat out of the system to the liver to be processed, and you get rid of it. So this is the good cholesterol, they call. It was lowering the risk of heart disease and reducing type 2 diabetes. So again, this idea with fats being vilified, we have to be careful with that. At the same time, for the athlete, they want to have about 30% fats as a max. Think with the gymnast, as I'll talk about, they want more of a carbohydrate, good intake of protein where it's above the recommended levels, I'd say like 1.3 to 1.5. And then the fats about 20 to 25%. That will provide them with the best fuel they need to perform the kind of work that they do.
Hey, Rob, can I interrupt you for one question?
Sure can, yeah.
Perfect. So the question is from Puneet. So if you have less than 30 grams of protein at breakfast, has it all gone to waste?
That's a good question. The answer to that is I don't know that I would say it all went to waste. What when I showed that slide, what that particular study was looking at is the amount of protein needed to turn on protein synthesis, okay? And protein synthesis, as I said, there's an amino acid called leucine that flips it on, and you need about 2 grams of leucine. And if you eat, how do you get 2 grams of leucine, that amino acid? You'd have to eat about 30 grams of protein to get 2 grams of leucine to flip on the protein synthesis switch. Whether or not that 10 grams goes completely unused I am not sure. I don't know. What I do know is that we perhaps missed that opportunity there at the morning to have protein synthesis. Does the 10 grams piggyback and sort of build up into the lunch meal? I don't know. But the point was, I think chronically over time, if you're getting less protein than you need, that will have an effect. You won't get the building properties that you're looking for. Does that satisfactorily answer the question? Okay.
No response, so I'm assuming yes.
No response.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
That's okay. Good. Okay. Now with fluids, they transport glucose to working muscles, eliminate waste products to the urine, and fluid and sweat releases heat through the skin. Fluids, of course, are water is essential to human life, right? Makes up over 50% of the body weight. It is involved in every biochemical reaction in the body. It dissolves just about everything. It is essential for life. You can live, I think Gandhi did fasts. He did several fasts over his life, over 30 days, no food. 3 to 5 days without water usually is about it. And then that's it, you're done, depending on the conditions. So it's an absolute requirement. And having said that, it is, we consider it the major macronutrient, even though it's not, other than trace minerals of water, it's not a providing energy, but it is a crucial, fundamental part of our diet. Now, when you look at the body, in terms of a well-hydrated person, the brain and the heart, 73% water. The lungs, 83% water. The skin, 64%. The muscles in the kidneys, 79%. And even healthy bones are watery at 31%. Okay? So this is, and you see in infants, it's even high. It's even a little bit higher. And in older adults, it's kind of not a good way to say it, but they kind of dry up. They really, their hydration status overall goes down. And a big part of that is because of the loss of muscle mass. Muscles, if it's holding about 80% of water, as they lose muscle mass, they have less total body water, and they're more at risk of dehydration as well. Now, for the whole idea with dehydration, managing it is your water loss, water intake is comparing that. So the causes of, just to go, these are some general causes, but vigorous exercise, not drinking enough. If people are sick, vomiting, diarrhea, you could dehydrate very, very quickly. Excessive sweating, and then inability to swallow, like dysphagia, diuretics, things like that. Now the symptoms are thirst, dry mouth and lips, nausea, fatigue, lightheadedness, darkened urine, decreased urine, and loss of 2% body weight, okay? For the athlete, he never even wants to get past, he or she never wants to get past thirst, ever. They don't want to, if you start feeling thirsty, you're kind of almost crossed that line of, you're pushing it. That's why this hydration of constantly keeping hydrated is important, and it'll be different for everybody. But you don't want to get to a point where you're thirsty and your mouth is drying up. You've gone too far. You have to make sure that you're well hydrated. So the choice is, athletes have a choice. They've got water and sports drinks. There's fluid intake from juices and milk. Milk is actually, for those who drink milk, it's a good hydration drink. And if you look at water in and of itself, it's accessible, available. We're lucky to have very good, clean water, and it is appropriate for all types of exercises. It may be needed to supplement with sports drinks. Usually water, if you're doing a workout that's less than 60 minutes and it's not intensely hot, then water is just fine. So if your athletes are just doing some stretching or rehabilitative programming work that's part of their routine. They don't need to be downing a sports drink. Hard sessions, the long hard sessions that they do with the multiple efforts and the breaks, they have to make sure they're getting not just a water, but a sport drink would be a good thing. And also making sure that they're eating at proper intervals within the training time, which I'll get into as well. So the sport drink contain electrolytes, so potassium, sodium, and and sugar is added to it as well. These sport drinks can be cut if the sugar load is too high, but you want to be able to provide fuel and hydration at the right times. Um, the fluid guidelines, this is was from the different organizations, the American Council of Sports Medicine and the Dietetics Association, American and Canadian Dietetics Association, looking at athletes and say, okay, well, before, you drink 12 to 20 ounces, 2 to 3 hours before your training or event. Then during, you're drinking 6 to 12 ounces for every 15 to 20 minutes. And after you replace your 150% of your sweat losses, you drink 3 cups every pound of weight loss through sweat. So it's a lot of information. The basic point I wanted to make is you want to make sure you're drinking before, during, and after. I wouldn't get hung up on the numbers, but the before, during, and after, this constant awareness. And as I said, athletes it'll be different. If you have a 40 kilogram female gymnast, and then a larger gymnast who's doing trampoline, a male gymnast who's much heavier, naturally what they're going to be able to tolerate when they're drinking at any one time is going to be very different. But the before and after and during when they're drinking, they have to make sure they're doing it. That's basically what it comes down to. Now, an interesting thing, just to look at salt. Salt is, this is from a picture book actually that my kids got for Christmas, and it's from their aunt. It's very good because it talks about salt. It says the only rock eaten by human beings, and all mammals included, and humans eat it, and sodium chloride is required to live. So sodium chloride is what we know as salt, and it's needed. It's crucial for digestion, breathing. And without it, the body would not be able to transport oxygen and nourishment. And it means you wouldn't be able to function at all. And the average person has about 3 of these salt shakers full, about 250 grams of sodium chloride. Now, you see to the left it says Na, that's the sodium, and chloride alone. Now, these alone, the sodium, the Na, the sodium is a metal, which is highly flammable. And then the chloride alone is a poisonous gas. But you bring them together, you got salt. It's kind of like 2 rambunctious kids that, they're terrorists, but when they get together, they play well. So that's just an interesting note on the chemistry of it, but it is crucial. So the point I make is some athletes, they really, they avoid salt. They go too far to try to avoid salt and salty foods, and that can be a problem. So the post-workout meal you don't have to salt things, but you don't want to shy away from it. And the sports drinks should have a certain amount of sodium in it. And most sports drinks, like a Gatorade, would have that as well. Okay. Now, what are most athletes lacking? What's missing is, as a general rule, is energy and fluids, okay? Regardless of the sport, over and over again, when you look at athletic performance, usually carbohydrates are the limiting substrate in performance, and most athletes don't consume enough. And they can run out of gas. And dehydration, as we just talked a lot about that, is for dissipating heat, getting your muscles to work well. You have even a slight decrease in blood volume and performance goes down. It just goes down. Your ability to, whether you're tracking a ball or trying to reach for a bar when you're in the air, all of this is impaired. So it's the main thing, it seems to be that energy and fluids are the main thing that over time athletes are lacking. And this is true for gymnasts as well. They're not eating enough. So again, when we go back to this bioenergetic demand of the gymnast, the creatine, phosphate, and carbohydrate, both glucose and glycogen as fuels, are going to be crucial. Okay, so when they're training, they have to make sure that they are eating in between during those moments of breaks. And when you eat, this gets to the timing, the nutrient timing of things. And when you eat is just as important as what you eat. Okay, so your goal is to think about energy balance in real time. So you're getting the energy when you need it. The exercising muscle needs fuel now, not later. What I mean by that, I have a picture of a car there. It's a Shelby Mustang, really nice car. Imagine you're going to take a road trip in the car down to Osoyoos, and you say, look, if you could talk to the car, and this is an example from a professor in the US who said this, and I thought it made a lot of sense, is that you talk to your car and say, look, we won't stop for gas. I know you can't make it the whole way. We won't stop for gas, but when I get there, I'll fill you up with gas. It just doesn't work that way. Okay. Now with the athlete, the same thing will happen. They may still kind of, they'll go through the motions, but they won't perform as well. The fuel is not there. It'll try to get it. Like it'll start breaking down. Like if you're not getting enough of this carbohydrate source and to build up creatine phosphate to perform your routines, you're going to start breaking down muscle through a process called gluconeogenesis to provide the energy so that your brain and your muscles and your red blood cells get the fuel. Okay, so it's a survival mechanism, but it's not efficient. It's not good for a competitive athlete. So there's a lot of things that people can do or not do and still go on with their day or perform or exercise. Like a lot of people will exercise fasted over and over. It's when I say exercise fasted, I mean they may not, they'll not eat in the morning, and then by noon they're exercising in the gym or doing a heavy workout. Over time, that's just, it's not going to work. We can do it. Our body will deal with it. But over time, this is not the way to go. And for the athlete, it's absolutely not the way to go because they're high performance, they're involved in high performance sport, and their requirements are very specific, and they need the best. They need to do what is best for them. So this idea of keeping the blood sugar stable and eating regularly is key to energy balance. And there was a study done with female soccer players. And what they did is they measured everybody's energy balance, and they had them eat specifically within plus or minus 400 calories. And so one group would eat throughout the day, eat regularly throughout the day with their training. And the other group would just wait and eat only one very large meal at the end of the day. The same calories, okay? And what they found very conclusively was that one large meal at the end of the day where they waited, they gained more fat, there was lower estrogen production, increased cortisol, and increased stress fracture risk. So for soccer players, they're running along the field. You can imagine now for the gymnast who is landing with huge forces, to have this increased stress fracture risk is a big problem. So this is an ongoing issue with that one big meal or missing meals, allowing yourself to become hypoglycemic is a problem. You have to eat in order to protect your system like this. So the regular consumption of foods and fluids is the requirement. Now this is the female athlete triad, and I'm sure many of you have heard of this. It's basically when three things come together, create almost this perfect storm, is that there's low energy, is disordered eating or restricted eating, not eating enough. And then you get a menstrual disturbance, So for young females, they might, it's delayed or they're missing it. And then low bone mineral density. And this is a sort of a vicious cycle. And they found with 78% of female athletes were in this female athlete triad, and 65% of non-athletes, female athletes, were suffering from this as well. Female high school non-athletes, I should say. So you now with gymnastics is a, and this is especially, I think, a concern with the female gymnasts, is that it is a sport where there's often emphasis on being small, as light as possible. Figure skating is something as well. So you can almost imagine there's going to be an issue with that. So this is a problem. It impairs performance, and it can negatively impact the health of the athlete after they've done their sport. So we can't allow this. So if someone needs to, we should really be looking at for both the males and females in the gymnasts, and they exemplify this with their body composition, but it's to really focus on maintaining that. And so if an athlete feels, oh, I have to lose 10 pounds, we'll shift the body composition happen, okay? Because muscle is compact. So what we'd want to do is, if we're eating the right way and timing it, this athlete can shed some body fat, add some muscle, is still the same weight, but they are now a high performing, their performance has gone up. Their ability to perform will stand out because they've switched the body composition, right? They've decreased the fat mass and increased the muscle mass. And eating is a big part of allowing that to happen, right, with the regular eating. And they have just to talk about the compactness of muscle. Some of you probably seen this. Everybody see that? That's what 5 pounds of muscle would look like, right? So it's compact and dense. And this is what 5 pounds of muscle, 5 pounds of fat. So the fat takes up a lot of volume. The muscle is nice, tight, and compact. So this is important when you're talking about body composition. So we can't get hung up on the weights, the numbers on the scale is basically my point on that. That could be a whole other presentation, but I wanted to make that point. Let's look at the immune system, okay? Now, as far as nutrition, timing, and immune system, malnutrition is a well-established secondary immunodeficiency. They've seen this in developing countries where there's no food, they're not eating enough calories, not enough protein, they're not getting enough zinc, copper, iron, and everything else. There's a huge defect in their ability for antibody formation and T cells, the T cells even working properly. So any little thing makes these people sick and very ill. Intense training and exhaustive competition can cause immunosuppression in athletes, okay? This is where if people push it too hard and they're not balancing their exercise with their rest and recovery and their nutrition, again, this could really depress the immune system. This is something I think, they've seen that a lot in marathon runners. They run. They weren't eating as well. They were overtraining, and they were constantly ill with these upper respiratory type infections. So that's an important thing to note, that nutrition is a big part of that in terms of keeping the immune system strong. Now, delayed eating and mistimed or inadequate consumption of carbohydrates and proteins and other nutrients can degrade the immune system. So by missing a meal or not eating, that meal, the immune system will start to drop, kind of ebbs and flows, and it could drop. And glucose and glutamine are the only fuels that are used by the immune system. So it has an absolute requirement for glucose, and glutamine is an amino acid, okay? So you're getting this if you're eating your whole complete proteins you're going to get enough glutamine. And the glucose then is the factor in terms of, are you letting your blood sugar dip too low? The problem with that is the decline in this blood glucose. There's a direct decrease in immune function. So the macrophages and lymphocyte function, these are important things to keep the immune system fighting against microorganisms. It starts to drop just from decrease in blood glucose. So this hypoglycemia, if it keeps happening, it's like chipping away at your immune response, your immune system. Obviously, not a good thing, right? So hypoglycemia needs to be avoided during physical activity. You cannot get to that point. This is where this regular feeding is very important. And the delays in food consumption post-training can negatively affect. So there's the recommendation is within an hour of workout or competition, you want to eat a full meal as soon after training within that hour. And if it's within 30 minutes, that's even better, So once the system just calms down after 30 minutes, you should be starting to replenish your system as soon as possible. You wouldn't want to wait. You get in a car and drive 2 hours, 2.5 hours to get home and then shower. And then before you sit down and eat, it's 3 hours. You don't want to do that, okay? Again, I'm talking about, these are general recommendations of when you're training and competing, when that time comes around again. But for any exercise that you do, you have to make sure that you're eating right after. So supplements, yay or nay? What do we do with that? Well, if they make sense, if there's a deficiency that cannot be obtained through a diet. I've seen athletes that have, they'll come in and they'll have extremely low vitamin D levels, and they need a vitamin D supplement for that, or low iron. Again, if they're caught in the female triad for the female athletes, they could be low in iron as well. And if they're not eating meat, they're not getting enough iron. But do know that you get iron, non-heme iron, from vegetable sources. And a vegetarian who knows what they're doing, I'm just this is an addendum to all of what I'm talking about here, is a vegetarian who knows what they're doing by mixing foods can get all the iron and protein that they need. Okay, so I want to make that point, but they have to know what they're doing. It is more work, it is more education in terms of understanding how to do that. But it's certainly, there's a lot of successful vegetarian athletes, okay? Too much of one nutrient can cancel out another. This is competition for nutrients. Like iron, calcium, magnesium, zinc, for example, they're all absorbed in one certain part of the small intestine. So if you're having too much of one particular nutrient, it cancels out the others. And the correct dosage and timing is important for everything. Even with a supplement, for example, for women who are expecting a child, and their doctors will often give them a supplement that has folic acid in it, okay, 400 units, for 4 doses to prevent neural tube defects. And what they found is if you take the 4 doses at 100 IUs per dose over the day, it's protective, has a protective effect in doing what it has to do. But one large single dose was pointing to being a potential for increasing cancer risk. So it's too much of one thing at one time. This is why medications and why food and why these factors have to be separated and dosed for it to be proper. For example, if your athlete needs, you calculate it and say, well, they need 135 grams of protein, they wouldn't eat it just at one sitting because it's going to be, a lot of it is lost, right? So the dosing is important. I want to finish off with crisis management. What's happening right now, right? So we're I'm sure we're all waking up every day. We're sort of, it's a little surreal. You're probably wondering, like, what the hell is going on? It is truly an unprecedented time. It's a word used all the time. But we're in this living right now with this so many unknowns, and it's stressful. That's the word that I wanted to use, and to try to use it as a main point of how we can work around it. So the stress, everybody is experiencing some level of stress, okay, and young and old. So the idea with stress is that the stress was, it elevates the adrenaline cortisol levels. This is your fight or flight, right? So it certainly is needed, helpful for survival. But when we're at home and uncertain and confused, the stress of that's ruminating like that is quite bad. So it actually depletes nutrient stores, compromises the immune system, leads to this low-grade inflammation. So your body is struggling with the stress. The stress has a direct effect, a endocrinological negative effect on the body. Inflammation, damage, leads to more stress, okay? So we say, what can we do? First and foremost, what tools do we have to manage the stress? So what you can be talking to your athletes about, said, look, you've got exercise and training, you've got sleep, you've got nutrition. These are the things that are under your control. And these are the things that you can, when you're approaching them positively, can make a big difference in how you're dealing with stress and keeping your health and getting ready to perform at a high level again. It can be quite empowering if we can get the right frame of mind to the athlete about how they can deal with this. So if you look at exercise and training, so the right exercise dose will increase immunity. So how has the athletes' exercise training routines changed? So the coaches, I'm sure you guys are sending out information about what your expectation for the athletes to do at home. Are they doing this at home? How are they managing this? Are they keeping a log of this? Are they improving at what they're doing? So they have to think about their exercise and training that they have to do at home in the same way they would at the gym. It's an important, serious part. It's a transition period, but it's just as important as what they were doing in the gym, and we have to figure that out. What's the good dose? What should they be doing? This is the coach's role. Now, sleep is, I put here, arguably the most underrated performance health parameter. When you're watching, you can watch someone exercise, coach can watch someone perform, nutritionist can follow up and see what someone's doing with their diet, but sleep, everybody else is asleep. You don't know what's happening, but sleep is so important for on so many levels that we'd have to do a whole other presentation to get some other expert to talk to you about it, but it is very important. So it's something to address as well. How are you sleeping? How are you managing it? And if they're stressed and not sleeping well, if they're not sleeping well, they can do all the exercise and nutrition that they want, and it will not work out that well for them. They have to make sure they can figure that out. So it may mean that the coach will have to discuss if sleep is an issue for some of the athletes, perhaps try to find some sleep hygiene recommendations, some solid recommendations from reputable sources about what they can do to improve their sleep hygiene. And then nutrition, of course, that clear evidence that nutrition is very important. So on nutrition, something to ask the athletes here is, how has your dietary habits and intake changed? Ask, okay? And if so, it shouldn't be how, it's how and why. Like, why have they changed, or how have they changed? You want to know, are they eating different? Are they eating enough? Are they eating too much? Are they eating too much of the wrong stuff? What is the access of healthy foods and availability? Okay. Now, what I've noticed is that as far as availability in grocery stores, and we've all seen the craziness with toilet paper disappearing, and now it's like hand wipes and sanitizers. But there was a lot of things like were hard to get, like canned beans and canned peas and soups and things like that. But never once have I seen the produce section lacking. At least the places I've been going to, there's still a lot of fresh produce. So this is very important and reassuring. The one thing is that for meats, for example, there has been, and I'm sure many have experienced this. You go to the grocery store and there's a limit on the amount of meat that you can purchase. It's limited to 2 packs or something like that. And this is, it's been impacted, short-staffed, or recently you may have heard in the news here in British Columbia, we've had some poultry plants that there was outbreaks in these plants. These people work elbow to elbow in there, and the plants closed down. They closed down. So this will in effect affect the availability of some of these animal protein sources. So what are the alternative protein sources may have to be explored? You have to look at that, and there's very good options to that. And I have something that I want to send to everybody that I can, we'll figure it out how to get it to everybody, but it's on how to build plant-based proteins together to make them complete. So it's a way to add to the diet, not just for protein, but other important nutrients as well. And then again is the special attention on meal timing and preventing hypoglycemia to keep the immune system strong. So the athletes at home, they're training, if they're at school, if they're students, they're doing their schooling online. They have so there's a lot of things going on in their lives, in their head, and they have to make sure that they keep eating to keep the levels up. They don't become hypoglycemic. They keep feeding and fueling their brain, because a well-functioning brain helps you make the right decisions and deal with stress and keep your immune system strong. So it's easy to fall off. You can get stuck in a rut where you just, your life is disrupted, but then other things fall apart, like your nutrition falls apart, or you stop exercising. So we're trying to tell the athlete that you have these things under your control. As coaches, we're going to help you with this training. We're going to give you advice of some of the things you can be doing with your questions on nutrition and rest and recovery. So just to put the ball in their court, that they have power to make changes and keep themselves healthy and strong. And that was the idea. Let them know they have control of their nutrition and they're capable of keeping themselves physically and mentally strong and healthy. And Hippocrates said, "Let food be thy medicine." Food is it really is an important. You look at nutrition and people think, well, you need nutrition for energy and to keep moving and do things. And but in terms of health and athletic performance, is you cannot perform at a high level without a solid plan and strong dietary habits. It's just, with time, it will catch up with you, so it makes all the difference in terms of high performance sport. So let food be thy medicine is I guess the last point I wanted to make with that. Now, I do have, this is what I want to send you. This is just a screenshot of salad greens and vegetables, basically making, as I said, the produce section is looking good in the stores. So they can pick up their greens, and they can add carbohydrate and protein additions to make what's called a sports salad and keep that in the fridge. And it's an easy way to get lots of nutrients regularly without too much trouble. What I've noticed some athletes say, you tell them that you want more variety in the diet, and they have good intentions. They go to the grocery store and they buy all kinds of fresh produce, and it sits in the drawer, and then they don't really know what to do with it. They take it out, they might make the broccoli one time, or wash the green peppers and chop them up and throw them into something. But if there's a way to get some of these foods in and make a salad that you can add and embellish to your meals, this really adds a lot of nutrient density to the meal, to the whole day, to the whole week. Okay, so it's a good way to do this. So I have an attachment that I can forward that to you, Leanne, and you can share with the group. And then this is the the plant-based protein builder. So you take a group A and you mix it either with a B, a C, or D, and you get your whole proteins. And a lot of cultures have figured this out. So you take rice and peas, or rice and lentils together, and the missing amino acids in the rice complement the missing amino acids in the lentils. You bring them together, you got all the amino acids, and you got a delicious meal that's has complete proteins in it. So it's a simple chart to kind of refer to as well. So is there any questions that I can answer on any of this?
Yes, we've had quite a few come through. So I'll start at the top here. What is your opinion on athletes' sugar consumption and non-nutritious sweeteners?
Yeah, with sugar consumption, you were talking about like concentrated sugars, like just sweet things. And did you say artificial sweeteners? Or
on athlete sugar consumption and non-nutritious sweeteners.
Non-nutritious sweeteners. Yeah, I'm not a fan of it. And I mean, it can be used sparingly. You know, like if you're talking about your overall carbohydrate intake, a certain percentage of that can come from concentrated sugars. So they love gummy bears and they want gummy bears as a snack. That's okay. If you look at the diet and there's more concentrated sugars, so it's high calorie, high sugary caloric value, but little nutritious value, and too much of that's creeping into the diet, it's not going to work out for them well. And what I mean by that is that, yeah, they'll be able to perform and do their activities, but over time, it's going to create problems. It's not going to allow them to perform the way they want to. It's too much concentrated sugar and you're missing out on the nutrients that you need. So you can allow for it, but sparingly. So it means that if your athlete loves to have a little bag of gummy bears every day, that's fine. But I wouldn't want them to have, they're eating just sweet concentrated things all the time. Like, you know, they're drinking Tang and then they're having something sweet. They're spreading like just using too much honey on things or syrups and things like that are just taking up the bulk of their carbohydrate intake. So they're getting a lot of calories from sweetened stuff. That becomes a problem. So I would advise against it. I'd say use it sparingly. Okay.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, the next question. What examples of snacking in between training would you suggest for athletes who trained 3 to 4 hours after school? If you have an example of a snack that they could have that would fuel the athletes adequately.
Yeah, this could be, you can make, like, again, with some athletes, things you want to watch for, I would say first off, is not too much fiber and not too much fat. Because that can create some issues for athletes when they're exercising, if there's too much fiber and or fat in the snacks during the training. So the sports drink and water is one thing, but in terms of snacks, which are very important, I would say it could be as simple as like a sandwich with something light in it, like I'd say with a little bit of protein, but not too much. I would say like a light tuna sandwich. You could have that. You could have like a rice cake with a bit of peanut butter. So just enough fat, but not too much on it. Like things that they can eat and snack on Those are the starchy carbohydrates, and then any kind of fruit would be recommended as well. So they could make your own little fruit salad with, chopped up apples and oranges, or have a banana, like things that are simple. And they have to gauge it for them, like if they're taking a break, how many breaks would they take generally between a 3 to 4 hour training session? Leanne, can someone give me an answer?
I'm gonna have to wait for somebody else to respond. One break.
One break. So midway, they get that break. Okay. So I would say it would be, considering they're doing all the fluid replenishing during the exercise, that break, an example would be a piece of fruit and like half a sandwich would work very well, because it'd give them time to digest and then get back to what they're doing. So you want enough, not too works for them. Other people find fruit can bother them. It's a little different for each person. But you want to eat enough in between, but not too much, if that makes sense. So I would say fruit with some carbohydrate source, like fruit is a carbohydrate, of course, but with some other starchy source, like crackers, rice cake, sandwich, like a bread with a little bit of filling.
Okay, perfect. So there was a question about the PowerPoint being available, and like Rob mentioned, he will be sending it to me after the session, and I can distribute it to everybody who participated today. So I'll take care of that afterwards.
Yes.
The next question, does collagen help with recovery from soft tissue injuries?
Ah, interesting, yeah. Collagen is, I tell you what I know it does do. In a clinical setting, I do some contract work in some clinical care, like long-term care residents, and some of them end up with wounds. Okay, so they can end up with some bad wounds, and generally it's a combination of their frailty. They're not eating enough, they're not moving enough, so they end up with wounds. And there's a certain products that I've been using in a clinical setting where it's a hydrolyzed whey protein with collagen added to it. And it works wonders in terms of wound healing, okay? So that I can tell you from very objective, this is something I've seen over the years, that it really helps in terms of healing wounds. And it's this collagen mix that's in there with these hydrolyzed whey proteins. Soft tissue injuries is, protein in general has to be high enough for repair, okay? So if you're not getting enough protein, then you have to increase it. And as I said, you don't need a lot more, but you need more. We talked about 1 to 2 to 1.7 grams, right, per kilogram. In terms of energy, you need enough energy as well. So if you're not getting enough calories, it's not going to help with the repair as well. So for soft tissue injuries, I would just say you would continue as, like, these recommendations I'm giving in terms of eating frequently will be important. You wouldn't want to go through long periods without eating, and then your immune system is dipping, because you need that to help with repair. It's part of the repair system. So the collagen, I would say, if you have, certainly worth a try. I don't know for sure in terms of soft tissue injuries, but with wounds, I can certainly say with confidence that mix with collagen does help with wound healing. So perhaps it would be good with soft tissue as well.
Okay, perfect. I did have another question come in regarding sleep, and I know you mentioned that you might not be an expert in this field, but do you happen to know a minimum amount of sleep that is required for teenage athletes?
Yes. There's some good resources. There's one that was put out by, I think it was a Canadian publication as well on sleep. But teenage athletes do need more sleep. I believe it's between, like, they go through the whole cycle, right? Like newborns need tons of sleep, right? They're like cats, are sleeping all day and eating all day. When you're talking about teens, I believe it's between 9 and 11 hours of sleep, okay? And there has been recommendations I've seen with, in addition to that, a nap post, like in the middle of the day, if it's possible. The former Eastern Bloc countries and Soviet unions were big on that. They were quite advanced in a lot of training methodology and the way they trained athletes and the way they recovered them. Putting the drugs aside, that's a completely different thing. But with sleep was something they explored heavily as well, and they had athletes take a 1 hour nap in the middle of the day during their training sessions. So for teens, they need definitely, it's at least 8 hours or more. I would say, I'd have to go back to it, but I believe it's between 9 and 11 hours for athletic teens. So that's a lot of sleep, okay? The problem with teens too is that there's a shift in how they manage their sleep and waking hours. When you have teens that kind of get up late in the day, it's not because they're being lazy. There's a physiological reason to that. I don't know what it is or why. And there's been some talk about, high school should actually open later instead of having classes as early as they have them. I think that's wishful thinking, and probably that's not going to happen. But the bottom line is that teens need more sleep. And the questions to ask is, are you sleeping right through the night? Are you having, because it's important. They could say, well, yeah, I do go to bed at 10 and I wake up at 9, let's say. You say, well, that's good. But the question would be also to ask, is it uninterrupted continual sleep? And if it is, that's great. Or if they get up once, that's fine. But they say they're constantly waking up every 3 hours. That's a problem, because they're being aroused and they're waking up from something, and it's disrupting their sleep. So that's breaking the patterns of deep sleep and REM sleep and how that all ties together. So I think try to encourage them to get, say, you need, at the very least, I would, and you might find in the environment is maybe it's too much light coming in through the window. They need a proper blind or something, Yeah.
Okay, so I have one more question here. For longer duration training, how about the use of maltodextrin and dextrose
Yes,
to add into water?
that's good. Yeah. Maltodextrose is it's glucose and glucose together. Like if you look at sucrose, table sugar, it's glucose and fructose, a glucose molecule, fructose molecule. Fructose has to go to the liver to get processed first. So the maltodextrose added is very good. It's a very good choice. You could add that right to the water. You can make your own sports drink. It's quite easy. You get a bag of that maltodextrose. You add they give you the amount. It tells you how much to get certain grams per ml, and you mix your drink. You can add a pinch of salt in there, and you've got a really good sports drink. And it goes. It doesn't have to. The good thing with those powders, that maltodextrin powder, is it goes right to the working muscles.
Okay, I think that might be it for the questions there. So thank you so much, Rob, for leading this session today. I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with our coaches and offering up the valuable insight to nutrition. That was fantastic.
Good. I'm glad. Yeah. Thanks very much, everybody, and good luck with everything. I'll send off this information to Leanne, and if the coaches, you have a excuse me, a question that comes along the way, you're welcome to. My email will be included. You're welcome to fire me a note, and I'll get back to you.
Perfect.
Okay.
So yeah, send any questions my way if you'd like. You can send them to coaching@gymbc.org, and I'd be happy to connect you with Rob after the fact.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll send those PowerPoint slides over to everybody as soon as they appear in my inbox. So hold tight for those. And then we will also be putting the recording on our Gymnastics BC YouTube page. So if you missed the beginning of the session, you can catch up or rewatch it at that point if you need any more information. So that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you again for everybody for participating today. With the email that I sent out earlier in the morning, there is a post-webinar survey, so you can provide any feedback in regards to today's session, or if you have any suggestions for future webinar topics as well, that's a great place to put your ideas. So we appreciate you guys taking the time and sending feedback our way. It's really helping us develop amazing content for you guys within our coaching community. So thank you for that. And again, Rob, thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate it. And yeah, that was amazing. Thank you
Okay,
so
good.
much.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. Okay.
Perfect. All right. Well, take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll connect with you all again soon.
Okay. Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye, everybody. Mm.